Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do a review of This Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin Faust. I read this book as a part of Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse's year-long course on mortality in literature and film. I'll leave a link to his announcement video for that below. He's already done a discussion of the movie Vagabond, which he just put up recently, and he's already done, by the time you see this video, he will have done both parts of his discussion video about this book, This Republic of Suffering. But I want to do a really quick review of the book because having read it and having a background in history, I had some thoughts about it that I just wanted to share. And I really was kind of inspired by Jason's video to talk a little bit more about the book. This Republic of Suffering is an attempt to tell the history of the impact of the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans during the Civil War on the United States of America, both then and still, carrying forward to today. It raises all kinds of questions about the afterlife and the meaning of death and what constitutes a good death and what the obligation of individuals and the government are to those who die in the service of the nation. And as such, it really kind of tells, I think, an untold history of the United States. I think that Faust hit upon a topic that is largely was largely forgotten about, and she does some incredible work here. Drew Gilpin Faust is a professor of history at Harvard. She's written other books before. This book won was a national bestseller. I believe it won the Pulitzer Prize, National Book Award. Can't remember. It's the National Book Award winner, Bancroft Prize winner, and the Pulitzer Prize finalist. So it won two big awards and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. It is a work of astonishing history based almost exclusively on primary sources. And having read the book, you kind of get the impression that Faust read every letter, every report, every document possible from every wife, mother, father, brother, sister, general, private, politician involved who wrote letters about their loved ones and their loved ones' deaths, who attempted to discover the location of the buried and unburied dead and to honor those dead. It is just an amazing work of scholarship, and I think it is an astonishing work of history. The book itself is based on, like I said, it's based on primary sources, and it raises a number of, I think, interesting points, essentially having to do with how we think about death and how the Civil War changed how we thought about death. As Jason talked about in his first video, before the Civil War, most Americans died at home. This was not possible during the Civil War. And since it wasn't possible, our ideas about the funeral service, our ideas about how to treat the dead and how people died changed. So many men died essentially alone, or maybe surrounded by their comrades, or died instantly, or died in excruciating pain under terrible circumstances without anyone there to minister or care for them or even really comfort them, that it really shocked America into questioning, what we think about, what we think constitutes a good death. And even to a certain extent, it caused us to kind of rethink the afterlife. So many people lost family members. They never, even discovered the location of their bodies after they died again. And there's so many tens of thousands of unknown soldiers in the Civil War that it brought up questions, and it caused people to want to redefine the afterlife, to redefine it as some place, in the case of those who became spiritualists, could contact and communicate with their dead loved ones across the veil between life and death. It caused many people to reassess how we thought about heaven or the afterlife, and less a place of harps and angels and constant praise of God, and more redefining the afterlife as a world much more like our own, only more perfect, in which our loved ones continue to exist, in a place where we would meet them and recognize them and return to that familial communion with them. Those things are forced by the massive deaths created during the Civil War. In addition to that, it forced us to reassess how we grieve. You know, a part of the process of death before the Civil War for so many people was being there, comforting their loved ones as they died. And while certainly the primary purpose of that was to provide comfort to the dying, it also probably helped with the grieving process and the idea and the acceptance and the realization that the person was gone. The Civil War, because so many men died absent their families and so far away, you know, kind of interrupted what had been the traditional grieving process, and it caused people to question, you know, what's the proper way to grieve, and how should grief take place, and how long do I grieve, and am I grieving too long? Am I just wallowing in self-pity? You know, all these kinds of things become questions that people had. I think the book really does a great job of emphasizing how much turmoil the Civil War created for those, you know, left behind. You know, the book talks about the process of soldiers themselves coming to accept killing, but most of the book kind of focuses on those issues of death and dying and grief and accounting and responsibility to the dead, and it just really raises a number of interesting issues. And I think even today we can still kind of see some of the impact of the changing views of death and our responsibilities to death in modern society today. You know, we frequently think about the Civil War today, I think, and we associate it with the end of slavery. We might associate it with the beginning of, you know, the United States living up to its promise of trying to achieve the principles of equality. We might associate it with ushering in the Industrial Revolution on a grand scale in the United States of America, a change in the view of government with national government power becoming preeminent. All these things we know are political and economic impacts of the Civil War, but the book kind of focuses on how this mass death experience affected the United States in all kinds of ways. For instance, the effort to locate and bury the Civil War dead, particularly on the part of the North, to locate and bury Union dead soldiers, led to the growth of the national government and our acceptance of the national government, and the government playing a role in what had one time been a really intimate process of burial and grieving. Now the government played a role, and once, you know, we kind of opened that door to allow the government to play a larger role in what had once been considered an area of private life, that door never really gets closed again. In addition, Faust mentions the cultural impact of the Civil War and the impact it had on writers like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson and Ambrose Bierce, and even on Herman Melville, and how, because the war forced those writers to change their concepts of death and grief and responsibility, that it ushered in a period of modernity in the United States of America that might not have come about without that kind of shared anguish, grief, sense of loss. This Republic of Suffering is an excellent work of history. It does exactly what I think great works of history do and can still do. It relies on hard evidence that comes from the best possible sources, in this case from primary sources, from letters, documents of the time period, and from those, and by immersing herself completely in that material, Faust was able to recognize the patterns and the threads of the change that the Civil War, and particularly in the case of this book, that the massive deaths of the Civil War created in the United States of America. And to me, that's what great works of history do. They cause us to reassess how we view events of the past. They cause us to reconsider the impact of those events on future generations, and they expose, you know, those threads that link us back to those events in the past, and how those events of the past still contribute to our ideas and our beliefs in modern society today. And if you have an interest in the Civil War or on how the Civil War impacted American society afterwards, I really think what this book is about, I would encourage you to read it. I think it's a valuable and great work of history.